Let's bring you some more breaking news, and that is that the Cabinet Office has lost its legal challenge over the COVID-19 inquiry chair's request for Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApp messages, notebooks and his diaries.
The Cabinet Office had refused to provide the documents, arguing that the request is so broad that it's bound to catch a large amount of irrelevant material. Lawyers for the Cabinet Office said the inquiry does not have the legal power to force ministers to release messages and records that it claims cover matters unconnected to the government's handling of COVID. But the Cabinet Office, in the last few minutes, has lost that legal challenge. Let's cross to Westminster and join our political reporter Olivia Utley. Olivia, what more can you tell us?
Yeah, this has been quite an interesting and quite a confusing story from the beginning. The Cabinet Office argued that it didn't want to release Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApps on the grounds that, not there was something embarrassing in there that they wanted covered up, although some speculated in Westminster that that might be the case, but simply because if the inquiry is allowed to access all sorts of messages that Boris Johnson sent, then it sets a precedent. And of course, we're expecting the COVID inquiry to go on for a number of months, if not years. And over that time, the Cabinet Office is worried that it will end up accessing material which will put in jeopardy the personal lives of not just ministers, but civil servants as well. So that was the Cabinet Office's argument. It said that no, we don't want to start releasing all sorts of irrelevant material to the COVID inquiry because there is this worry about privacy. Now, we thought that that argument from the Cabinet Office probably would be rejected because, of course, the Cabinet Office signed up to the COVID inquiry. The Cabinet Office agreed to give Baroness Hallett, the chair of that committee, a very, very wide remit, essentially telling her she could have whatever she liked. So it's not a huge surprise here that the government has lost that case. It is a little bit of a blow for Rishi Sunak, simply because it's been a pretty tough day for him today. He's facing yet another by-election. And of course, Labour will use this. It's sort of fuel to Labour's fire that Rishi Sunak is weak, is inexperienced and doesn't really know what it's doing. In a political sense, of course, it's a bit of a moot point. Boris Johnson had already handed those unredacted WhatsApp messages over directly to the COVID inquiry, so it didn't really matter whether or not the Cabinet Office was prepared to release them themselves. But just for the sake of Rishi Sunak's sort of integrity and the kind of message that he's giving out to not just the public, but of course his own MPs, it's another big blow.
I mean, two lawyers, Hugo Keith KC, for the inquiry itself, saying the idea that the Cabinet Office could decide what was relevant would emasculate this and future inquiries. And obviously Baroness Hallett said, you know, it's up to her to decide what's actually relevant or not. But we've also got Lord David Pannick KC on behalf of Boris Johnson, saying there was a real danger of undermining public confidence in the process. So Johnson was agreeing, if you like, with the position of the inquiry itself.
Yeah, this is what was so odd. Boris Johnson agreed with Baroness Hallett that she should be able to access whatever WhatsApp messages she liked. Now, that was because, of course, when it emerged that Boris Johnson's messages weren't being handed over to the COVID inquiry in the first place, it was assumed in Westminster and in the media that there was something on Boris Johnson's phone that he didn't want the COVID inquiry to see. Now, Boris Johnson put an end to that by saying, well, no, I'm perfectly happy to hand over my phone, and then actually went as far as to say, here is my phone, I don't care what the Cabinet Office says. Now, Boris Johnson said that he was perfectly fine with the Cabinet Office saying that they thought that it was a dangerous precedent to set, but he said that he didn't want to be used as a sort of case study for that. And in doing this, in overturning the Cabinet Office's case here, the Cabinet Office, the inquiry has set itself a pretty big precedent. It will now be able to access whatever it likes. Now, of course, there is a bit of a danger there that the privacy of ministers and civil servants will be compromised, and, which is what David Pannick was alluding to there is a bit of a danger that if this inquiry is allowed to access any private conversations between ministers, then could we end up in a situation where ministers are afraid to talk to each other in private, are afraid to have sort of robust, frank conversations about public policy because they're so worried that it's going to end up in the public eye. That is what the Cabinet Office claims it wanted to avoid, and that's the situation that we find ourselves in now.
And Olivia, very quickly, have we got any indication how much stuff Baroness Hallett's going to have to go through now?
It is an enormous amount of messages that Baroness Hallett will have to go through. I mean, we were talking about tens of thousands of messages which Boris Johnson had already handed over, and those messages were only from May 2021 onwards. The messages before that were on an old phone which the security services had told Boris Johnson he shouldn't hand over because of a security compromise. So it is now thought that that phone can be securely accessed, so Baroness Hallett will have access to all of the messages from Boris Johnson from the entire COVID area. And, as I say, this inquiry is not going to end anytime soon. And now there is this precedent set that the COVID inquiry can access any messages it wants from cabinet ministers from that entire period. So I think we can expect this inquiry to take a very long time as Baroness Hallett and her team wade through all of that really important material.